Okay. All right, welcome everyone to our launch event for Laura Brooke Robson's new book. I'm Julie, I'm the events manager at Roundabout Books. We miss terribly having in-store events. So I want to let everybody know that they will be coming towards the fall. Until then, we're going to maintain our Zoom, which is why we are blessed to have Laura joining us from Australia, which is so cool. So if you aren't already following our social media or checking our event calendar, please do. There's so many amazing events coming up. So tonight, as I'm still letting people in, we are so excited to have both of these authors that we're gonna watch tonight. So first, Laura Brooke Robson grew up in Bend, Oregon, and moved to California to study English at Stanford University. She currently lives in Melbourne, Australia, where she enjoys drinking too much coffee and swimming in places she's probably not supposed to swim. Girls at the Edge of the World is her debut novel and was featured on the BuzzFeed list 27 sci-fi fantasy YA books that are about to be your new favorites, calling it a swoony sapphic romance fantasy set amid a literal apocryphal flood. Joining us for the In Conversation is Nina Lacour. She is the best-selling and Michael L. Prince award-winning author of 4 critically acclaimed young adult novels published by Dutton Books. Those include We Are Okay, Hold Still, The Disenchantments, and Everything Leads to You. She is also the co-author of You Know Me Well, a novel written in collaboration with David Levithan and published by St. Martin's, Griffin, and a contributor to numerous anthologies, including Summer Days and Summer Nights, edited by Stephanie Perkins. So I just want to remind everyone as we're on Zoom, please make sure to keep yourself muted so that we can listen to our wonderful conversation. We will have Q&A towards the end. If you're familiar with Zoom, you can put your Q&A in the chat. And if you're not able to, I can read them, or we can also allow people to be unmuted and talk directly to our authors. So with that said, I am going to mute myself and let these two lovely people take over.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Laura, I am so excited to be able to ask you so many questions about your novel. When I wrote to you last, I hadn't finished it quite yet, and I have finished it now, and so I can say definitively that I loved it. It was so beautiful and such a page turner and kept me guessing and had so many twists and turns, and just congratulations on such a gorgeous debut.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And so tell us how did you spend this day? This was your launch day, very unconventional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm half a day kind of separated from everyone else. So June 8th, which I'd been counting down to for so long, was yesterday for me, which was much quieter. And today I woke up to pouring rain, which feels very fitting if you have read the book, since it's all about storms. And had my coffee and opened my phone and saw just so many wonderful messages. I'm really excited that we're doing this event with Roundabout because this book has kind of brought me the chance to reconnect with so many people I went to elementary school with and high school with. I see teachers who are here, hi. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so much of what I wanted to do with this story was talk about the power of story. And it feels really special that this story has been so powerful to me and that it has like reconnected me with a lot of people and places. So that's been absolutely amazing.
That's so wonderful. I'm so glad that you could feel all of that love and support, even though you're far away and it's not even the 8th for you anymore. That's so lovely. All right. Well, I know you're going to read a section for us, and I'm very excited to hear that. But before you dive in, I was hoping that you could tell everybody a bit about Natasha and Ella, who are our heroines, and the situations that we find them in. Like, what struck me a lot when I started was that they're both intensely driven, but they're driven by very different things. Natasha is driven by survival, and Ella is driven by revenge. As we begin, and so tell us a bit about them before you read to us.
Yes, well. This is This is Natasha. This is Ella. They are our girls at the edge of the world. And the book takes place on the cusp of this biblical flood. 1,200 years ago, there was a flood that covered the ocean in water for a whole year. And no one thought that there would be another global flood so soon, and everyone's been caught off guard. And Natasha is the principal flyer for the Kostrovian Royal Flyers. That means she is an aerial silks performer. Lives in the palace. The flyers are kind of seen to preserve the country's culture, very important. And so Natasha is confident that although this terrible thing is happening to the world, she'll be safe. She and her friends will be safe because they'll be on the royal fleet, and a lot of people will drown, and that's terrible. But at least Natasha and her friends, her family, will be okay. And then she finds out that they won't be. She finds out that the flyers won't be on the fleet. And she decides that the only way she can survive and ensure that the other flyers will survive is by marrying the young King Nikolai. Meanwhile, Ella, who is our other point of view character, she is driven by revenge. She has lost all of the people she really loved in her life, including Cassia, who was the king's sister, Princess Cassia. And she was assassinated, and Ella believes that Nikolai is responsible. And so she's come to kill the king. And so one girl wants to marry the king, one girl wants to kill the king. Only one can get what she wants, unless they realize that what they set out to get is not actually what they wanted all along.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's such a great description of the story and how it begins. And now read to us so we can get a sense of what your book is like.
Yes. So I heard it was a good idea to read from an early section of the book because then it would make sense for everyone, but I'm not. I'm reading from chapter 20 because it's one of the first moments that you get to see Ella and Natasha interacting with each other and in the same place as all the other flyers. And you get to see how their worldviews are not going to mesh together well, at least at first. So this is a really short chapter, but it's from Ella's point of view. Okay. Gregor, Zacharias, Matthias, Twain, Sophie tells me over breakfast, pointing around the kitchen at the guards. Those are the good ones. If you ever need anything, ask one of them. Greta sits down across from us with a bowl of porridge. What are we talking about? I'm teaching Ella who to look out for. Greta rolls her eyes. You don't have to look out for anyone. Kostrovian guards are the best in the world. The best at what? I say. Cornhole? I play a mean game of cornhole. Ness sits next. Oh, are we playing lawn games? I love lawn games. Of course you do, Greta says, not unkindly. I glance back at the stove. Katla's and Natasha's heads are bent by the porridge pot. I can't see Natasha's face. Katla looks serious. What's up with them? I ask. Sophie hesitates. Natasha mentioned she wanted to talk to all of us about something this morning. We don't have to wait much longer to find out what. When Natasha and Katla sit, neither of them have bowls. I guess whatever they want to tell us was too important to remember porridge. Natasha puts her palms on the table and leans in, lets out a breath. Quietly, she says, I have news. Adelaida doesn't want me to tell you, but she glances at Sophie. I found out we're not going on the Royal Fleet. Silence. Then Ness says, I don't understand. If I'd had any plans of surviving to the flood, I imagine this news would be quite distressing. I try to look troubled. I guess they're being really careful about the rosters for the ships, Natasha says. They're only letting important, powerful people on. But we're the flyers, Ness says. We are important. Natasha lifts her hands. Look, Adelaida didn't want me to tell you because she didn't want you all to worry. We're working on a plan. What plan? Sophie says, her eyebrows wrinkling. A pause. That's when I notice the thin chain around Natasha's neck. At the end of it, half hidden behind her hair, a golden ring hanging like a pendant. Oh, so that's how it is. I fold my arms over my chest and lean back. Adelaida thinks I have a shot at being queen, Natasha says. Ness lets out a happy breath and claps her hands together. Greta looks skeptical. Even if he did pick you, you think you'd be able to bring a bunch of guests? Yes, Natasha says curtly. Besides, why do you care? You're on the fleet either way. Well, I think it's a wonderful idea, Ness says. Just like a fairy tale. Yeah, I say, not disguising my bitterness well enough. Doesn't every little girl dream of falling in love with royalty? Natasha looks up. She frowns like she can't quite make sense of me. I wish Cassia were here with me. If she were, she'd roll her eyes at the way Ness is giggling, the way Natasha says, when I'm queen, we'll all be safe. Nikolai will keep all of us safe. It's sad that Natasha thinks Nikolai can do anything for her, that she thinks he's capable of care, that she thinks he is her best chance of surviving the flood. I almost feel bad, but when I see the way she tugs on her necklace, slides the ring back and forth across it, my heart hardens. She wants to trust Nikolai? Fine, she'll see how far that gets her. Cassia trusted Nikolai once. By now, everyone should know better.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good. I love hearing you read it too. Okay, so Girls at the Edge of the World is your debut novel.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about your path, to writing the book and finding a publisher and just your whole journey.
Yes. So I've often heard authors ask, like, when did you first realize that books didn't just appear, that there was an author behind them? I don't think I ever didn't know. Intense, like third grader who was like, I will submit to literary publish my book. And I kind of always knew that it was some connection was unstable. Am I still here?
Yeah, you're going in and out a little bit, but we can totally follow what you're saying. Your image is frozen, but yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
Great. So I wrote my first book when I was 14, I think, and just kind of kept writing, thought of them as practice novels, which in retrospect, I think was really healthy. I was just writing for me, just to kind of see what I liked to do. And it was a fun hobby that I always hoped I would be able to turn into something more. I wrote a book in college that was the first thing that I sent to literary agents that I queried. And it didn't end up getting me a literary agent, but it was a really good experience in editing for the first time, rather than just like trying to do NaNoWriMo and churning out a draft. And then I wrote this book in the summer of 2017, and it came out really quickly. I felt really excited about it. In retrospect, I don't think I edited it enough, but it was such a big step up from what I had written previously that had gotten some small amount of interest from agents. And I was like, well, this is so much better than that whatever, it's fine. I'm just going to send it. And it was the fall of my senior year of college. And so every other day I was either sending a query letter or applying for a job. And I was like, what am I going to do after I graduate? This is a fun question. And ended up getting calls with agents and had a few offers of representation, which was really exciting. This is my big thumbs up to, yes, you can get out of the slush pile. I just cold queried agents, and Danielle Burby is my agent from Nelson Literary Agency. I absolutely fell in love with her the moment that we spoke. I felt like she had such a great vision for the book and so much enthusiasm. And I think soon before or after her, I talked to another agent who was like, I love the premise, but what if Natasha and Ella had a really strong friendship? And I was like, oh no, that's not the book I've written at all. That's not the point of this. But I felt like Danielle's vision just matched with mine entirely. And it was an amazing decision. And so I signed with her around Thanksgiving of 2017. We did a big revision together and then went on submission, which was a really fun, exciting process. I don't think I realized that it went quite so quickly at the time, but now that I have a bit more perspective on how slow the publishing industry moves, wow, that was really fast. I was actually traveling in Vietnam with a couple of friends when Danielle was organizing these phone calls with editors from publishing houses. And so I came by time change call, honest, because I remember sitting in like the laundry room of a hostel talking to Kathy Dawson at Penguin, who eventually ended up acquiring my book. And similarly just felt like she was so smart. Her vision was going to make the book so much stronger. And yeah, so then I sold the book and signed the contract soon after I graduated, and then realized that there was going to be a lot of just sitting around and waiting and trying to write something new. It felt like everything had been going so quickly, and then all of a sudden there was this big break pulled. And so now it's been over 3 years since I signed that book, and a heck of a lot of revisions. The book had 4 points of view, I think, when I first wrote it, and then 2, and then 1, and then 2 again. There were all sorts of different antagonistic forces. Yeah, it was, I'd written books before, but in some ways I felt like I hadn't, because I felt like I was just learning new things very quickly and couldn't possibly keep up. I don't know if I hope that sensation goes away as I write more books, or if I'm glad that that I feel like I'm learning so much.
I think it's a learning experience each time. Yeah.
But yeah, now it's fine. Yeah.
Oh, we missed the last thing that you said. Can you say your last sentence again?
I think it's finally, I'm glad it's here. Something
okay,
like
good.
That.
Me too. And that's such a beautiful journey. It's, so exciting to have enthusiasm and rare to have enthusiasm from multiple agents and multiple editors wanting to acquire your book. So congratulations. So wonderful.
Yeah, I felt really lucky. I work to not count too much on external validation, because it's so nice to feel like, you're writing the story for you, but it's also, it's really exciting to feel like there are other people who are interested. And I was glad that I had, the support of Danielle and Kathy, and then my newer editor, Ellen, who's also amazing, cheering for me as I rewrote the book again. And I was like, what? It's so different. Isn't it different from when everyone first signed me? What did you see? What's still there?
Oh, that's so great. Okay, so reading your novel really did feel like reading a fairy tale. It was just so lush and beautiful and descriptive, and had so many of the kind of the classic fairy tale elements, and yet it's spun in such a new and exciting way. And, there were specific fairy tales, a couple of which are even mentioned in the book, like the 12 Dancing Princesses. I also thought about Cinderella because there's a ball. And I loved your concept of the Thames fables that are woven into the novel. And so I thought, I should ask how fairy tales and fables and just stories and storytelling in general have influenced your writing.
Yeah, well, I remember growing up, we had like a big book of illustrated fairy tales, and 12 Dancing Princesses was one of them. And I remember loving it, but also thinking that there wasn't nearly enough. I think fairy tales by nature are so sparse that they're really ripe for retelling, because it's like, I don't just want to know what happens to the princesses. I want to know all 12 of their names. I want to know what the friend groups within the 12 sisters are. Like, what are their goals? What are their hobbies? And I think that one thing that I took a class in college on narratology, where we talked a lot about like the morphology of fables and folktales. And one thing that we talked about was how characters are almost more function than person in a fairy tale, which I thought was really interesting and has stuck with me, that the characters don't tend to have personalities. They might not even have names. You just have the farmer, the princess. And I was really interested in how we could see ourselves in fairy tales and in this tradition of storytelling when it is so sparse. And in the very first draft of this, actually, none of the male characters had names. They were only referred to by function. They were only called like the king. And there were a bunch more royals at the time. So it was like the king, the prince, the other prince, the guards. I eventually got rid of that because it was very confusing, as you can imagine. But I still really like the idea of kind of analyzing why what a story does when characters are flattened that way, and what kind of space it gives other characters when, you have Natasha and Ella, who are these full-blown characters, up next to the king, who is just the king, and he's not really a person beyond that. So that was something that I really liked playing with, was just thinking about how we interact with stories, how we interact with fairy tales, and yeah, how we can place ourselves in those stories when in some ways they are a bit of a blank slate.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I also had illustrated fairy tales as a kid and loved the 12 Dancing Princesses. That was, I think, one of my favorites in the collection. And I do remember wanting more and like reading that, what was it, like 3 dense pages or something, it's so short, and wanting more. And it's just such a wonderful experience to see some of those elements, like all of these girls who are really connected in a sisterhood of a kind, who dance together and who live together, and it's just I love what you did, the nods to the different stories within yours.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed, there are like little chunks of these fables that show up in the book, and I really enjoyed writing those because it's such a different voice to say, like, oh no, the princess said, I shall never go with you. Like, it's just a very different kind of dialogue and style, and it feels very fun and playful, and it feels kind of like when you're making up a story as a kid, and kind of trying to analyze like why that feels so different was really fun.
That's really great. I also really like in the novel, like how the different characters, like how they kind of choose their own belief systems, and how much they rely on them, or how they reject other systems, and how just storytelling and the stories that we believe in general just can be so influential about the choices we make and the way that we see the world, and our responsibilities within our society. And
I love that.
Okay, so we have to talk about love, because this is a love story.
Yes.
And so Ella has this beautiful line describing how she felt when she first met Cassia. And the line is it's so beautiful. It just jumped out at me. It says, "That's how I loved her, quick as a snake bite and twice as painful." And, this is before, Ella at this point has already had a lot of loss in her life, but this was before Cassia was killed, of course. This is the beginning of new love, and it's described as painful. And it made me think, even before Cassia died, love was associated with pain for Ella. And in general, love in your novel is incredibly fraught. I guess the main thing is like they're preparing for the flood. They're preparing for this storm that will kill many, many people, and most people will die. And so there's just kind of the question in general, like, how do you love in the face of oblivion? Which I think is also just a very human question, like, how do we love so much when we know that people will die and, horrible things will happen. But then also because the women are labeled as sirens, and you should talk a little bit about the brands that they get. It adds another layer of struggle to what it means to love in the face of imminent catastrophe. So I just wanted you to talk a little bit about how love and pain are intertwined in the story.
Yeah. I think I've always been really interested in how love and power go together. And especially in fairy tales, like, when we think about the story of Cinderella, I think a lot of us are really skeptical that how could Cinderella actually fall in love with the prince after one dance? But I think we're a lot less skeptical of the fact that she would marry him so quickly, because he represents so much possibility and power. She gets to be a princess. She gets to get away from her unkind family. Sounds like a great deal. Totally understandable that she would accept that power, even if we're more skeptical of the love. And I think love is power in two ways, because obviously on the more optimistic side, loving someone makes you more courageous and compassionate, and all of that is wonderful. But there's also, it's really hard to disentangle loving someone or being in a relationship with someone or even being a friend with someone from what they bring you and what sort of opportunities they provide you. And, maybe they represent wealth or stability or safety. And I think especially when you're young, it's really hard to separate these desires. And so Natasha's feelings for Nikolai have always been fairly strategic. There's some level of attraction there, but she's really looking out for her own safety and the safety of her friends. And though Ella's feelings for Cassia are maybe a bit stronger and a bit more genuine, Ella also definitely falls in love with Cassia and then has her life completely changed. Cassia is someone who's really driven, who knows exactly what she's going to do. It's reclaim the throne. And because Ella spends time with her, she gets swept up in this whole new life. And I'm noticing that in a lot of the relationships I write about, the thing that the characters maybe want most in a lot of the relationships they have, and the most devastating consequence of the relationship falling apart, comes back to identity. So it's like, what does the fact that the king or the princess is willing to love you mean about you? Does it mean that you are stronger or more capable or can have this like long and impactful life? And when that love falls apart, what does it mean that you've lost? Have you lost identity? Have you lost a part of yourself? And so I think I was really interested in examining how those things go together. That's the pain of when we lose not just a relationship, but are
you back? We lost you for a second. Oh, there you are.
I'm back.
Okay. Okay.
Am I back?
Yeah, you're back. Sort of.
I'm sorry about this.
Yeah, no, you're fine.
Okay. Yeah, the last thing I said, in case it didn't catch, was the thing that I'm most interested in about how love and pain are related is how love and loss of identity are related, and how painful loss of identity is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh yeah. That's really beautiful. Okay. Tell us about the tattoos and the brands and how you chose to, use the siren imagery and that story.
Yes. So I think there's a Margaret Atwood poem that's about sirens, where the sirens are just hanging out and like trying to get the sailors to come closer because they're hungry. And I always thought that it was really just kind of delicious to go from the sirens' point of view. And I think that stayed in my head because in this story, Tam's Fables is one of the kind of competing texts that are building the worldview. And the other one is this book called Captain's Log, which is a captain's log written by Antinous Kos, who was a sailor who survived the last flood. And because the last flood destroyed so much written material, the books and stories that did survive became really, really important. And people are now looking at it as kind of a manual to survive this coming flood. And I think of him as kind of like a charismatic trickster Odysseus figure. So he has a lot of like Greek mythology influence, which was fun pairing with the more Grimm brothers fables. And there are sirens, just like in the Odyssey, who they see in their year at sea, or think that they see at least, and describe them as temptresses who are just there to kill them or hurt them or seduce them. And that's not really the place of women in their mind. And Antinous Kos, who's the writer of this captain's log, he's really only interested in women as child bearers in the new world to repopulate. And women don't really play any sort of crucial role in the writings that he has. And so Siren has become sort of a shorthand for queer women in this world, in that it's a woman who is not really interested in being around for a man's pleasure or having his children. And so they use it as kind of a slur. They use it as a brand. And then there's kind of an irony in it, of course, in that this man thinks that he saw these women who were out on the sea during the last flood, and they were surviving without him. They were taking care of themselves and each other. And so that's the very first page that I wrote of this in a free writing journal. That's the thing that is there, is Ella with her siren tattoos. That was the very first image that I had of this book.
Yeah, I can see why it's such a striking image. And throughout the novel, seeing her tattoo being exposed, or seeing it being, there's so many different kind of casts over the tattoo. Like sometimes it makes her vulnerable, sometimes it makes her strong. Like it's really cool the way you use that.
Oh,
okay. Yeah. So I have one other prepared question for you, in that passage that I sent to you to read if you marked it. And then the wonderful audience here who is so excited to celebrate your book can ask questions. And I think Julie is going to moderate that part. So people get ready with your questions. But in the meantime, so I asked you to read this passage. I found it so striking. As the novel progresses, there are more and more of this kind of nature imagery and the strange things that are happening in the natural world. And so will you read that section to us, and then I'll ask you about it?
Yes. Okay. But I have to fly. I have to. Tears sting my eyes as I climb, clutching the silk with my feet to relieve the burden on my wrist. Another bird flies overhead, narrowly missing the top of the rig. Then 3 more, 5 more, a flock so large I can't count all the sets of wings. Cranes, heart-faced barn owls, jewel-feathered bee-eaters, and a dozen other species whose names I don't know. As they pass overhead, they shadow the city like dusk has fallen. All the eyes that clung to me find the birds instead. And then, as the birds head for the city's edge, all those eyes find the sea. A pillow of cloud, as dark and smooth as a seal in water, balloons from the horizon. Storm 5, Captain's log says, begins with the exodus of the birds.
It's so beautiful and so chilling at the same time. So tell us about, the storms and the climate change aspect. Were those always part of the manuscript, or did they come in later after you'd worked out other elements of the story first?
Yes. So during the Slow Novel Lab, which was a writing workshop that I did with Nina a year ago, she brought a quote from the writer Anne Ursu that I loved, and I wrote down, and it's, "Our stories sneak up behind us and whisper, 'This is what I'm talking about. Your job is to get quiet enough to listen.'" And that really, really resonated with me because, as I said, I edited this book a lot of different ways for what felt like forever. And about 3 drafts in, Kathy, who was my editor at the time, asked me, "Do you really know what this book is about?" And I thought, yes, obviously I do. It's about the aerial people and the floods. I get it. But the truth was I didn't. And it was a really, really good question and really good advice, because it had a lot of the elements that I knew I wanted to write about. It had flooding and aerial silks and fairy tales, but it didn't really have theme. And meanwhile, I'd been reading a lot of climate change nonfiction and feeling an urge to tell a story that was very much entwined with the natural world. And I'd started thinking to myself, I just need to get through this aerial silks book, and then I can write the climate change book. And in retrospect, that's really silly, because the world is flooding of, I'm already writing a book about the environment. And I think there was so much on the page that was already there and pointing to theme and this connection with the natural world and how stories interact with the natural world and how we tell stories about the environment. But it was almost like I knew what I wanted to say, but not how. And so it hadn't made it on the page yet. And when everything clicked, it really did make so much more sense. And then I could go back in and find where I had already left breadcrumb trails for myself. And I was just listening to Alana K. Arnold's episode of First Draft with Sarah, and just wonderful podcast if you're a reader or writer. Nina has 2 awesome episodes as well. But Alana talked about pouring everything into a draft. And I found that that's really true, that oftentimes if I'm withholding something, I'm withholding the thing that my subconscious is telling me needs to go in this book. Because it's like I had Ariel Silk book over here, and I had urge to write something about climate and story and how those go together over here. And it was kind of pulling me this way. And then when I pushed them together, like on some level, I knew that they were supposed to be the same story, but I was just having a hard time weaving them together. And yeah, it took Kathy saying, "What is this book about?" for me to realize I need to know exactly what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it's so interesting how like a simple question like that can just like make something click in your brain that there's the answer that's been in front of you all along, but that you hadn't thought of. And the nature aspects of the novel were some of my favorites. I mean, they were just so striking and strange, like the lizards and the flowers and the swimming lynx, and just so many fantastic nature images.
There's part of me that was really worried as I was writing those that people were going to be frustrated that it didn't all make sense by the end, that there are some elements of nature that are just kind of the way that it is in the book. And I hope that it feels a bit like nature in real life, where there are a lot of things happening that we don't necessarily understand, but isn't it amazing that we're curious? I hope that that's how readers feel.
Oh yeah, no, I think absolutely. I mean, we know that we're entering this world at a specific time when a lot of things are unexplainable and uncertain and going terribly wrong. So
yes,
it works beautifully as it is. All right. Well, I have other questions that I can ask too if the audience is shy, but I'll turn it over to Julie now to see if she wants to collect audience questions.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So first, I do have something to read. Someone called and ordered the book and wanted to pass along this message. Laura, we are so proud of you and can't wait to read your book, from Allison and Keith.
Oh, thank you.
I was told to read that email. So if you're not familiar with Zoom, there are a couple ways that you can ask questions. You can type them directly into the chat window, or you can do the raise hand feature. And if you do that, then I'm able to unmute you. So if anyone has questions, comments, anything like that that you want to share, now is the time. We'll give it a second. It takes some, to catch up. All right. Well, Nina, why don't you go ahead and ask one of those while we're waiting for the audience to put them in the chat window.
Absolutely. Okay, so I am always fascinated by process, Laura. So I want to hear about like how you write, what time of day, like if you write regularly, if you have anything that you like need to be with you when you work. Tell us about how do you write from beginning to end? Like how do you write? How do you do it?
I think, so I'd heard authors talk before about how like every book is a different challenge and you find that each of them need different things. And I thought, haha, that won't be me though. I'll come up with a perfect process and it will work every time. And obviously I was wrong. And it has been true that really every book has just required sort of a different combination of elements. This book, for example, I took the strategy of just rewriting a lot of different drafts and sort of throwing word spaghetti at the wall until I figured out what stuck. And that was not a very efficient process, but I also am really happy that I ended up throwing so many, I don't know, rounds of spaghetti at the wall. And what I'm working on right now, I'm about halfway through a brand new project that no one has looked at yet, and have taken a totally different strategy where I plotted it out sort of as well as I felt like I could, but then I started writing. And when I hit a wall, whereas in the past I would just power through and complete a draft, and then maybe some bits of that draft would work and I would start a new draft from the beginning. This time I've been going back and shoring up the foundation every time I feel a little unsure about where I'm going. And it seems to be working so far. Maybe this is my new process, but probably it's only going to work for this book, and then I'll have to figure out something new next time. But that's been a really fun exploration process of figuring out just like what works for me, and realizing that I'm probably never going to get it perfect.
Well, that actually answers one of the questions that did come in the chat of what you were working on next. And I know that's always a question for authors. And sometimes you're not, or it's gonna, writing takes so long and then the publishing process takes so long. I have a question about your cover. I'm always interested to find out kind of, were there multiple covers? Did they come to you with this one and it was like, boom, it's done? Like, what did you want to see on the cover?
I had very little opinion. Honestly, I was kind of like, I love all of the covers that are coming out of Dial right now. Like, I'm sure it'll be great, but I don't have any idea enough about like marketing and what booksellers like to see. So I trust you. And I believe Nina and I actually have the same cover designer, Samira Iravani, who was wonderful. And we got a couple different versions of this. There was another version that was more like pink and black. And I think we all loved the purples and blues. Honestly, I wasn't very involved. They sent a preliminary version of this and then sent another version with like a few additions and tweaks. And then it came out into the world. But I was super excited, but I didn't have very much personal involvement with it.
I think that's actually probably a good thing, because I know from my experience with authors and publishers, the cover can be very specific to someone, and if you're not finding that they're bringing that out, so it's nice to hear that they kind of just, what you said, they got your book and then they give you this cover. So we have another question, and we actually have two, and one of them is one that I love, but what has been the most surprising thing about publishing a book?
Ooh, the most surprising thing. The timeline, that really surprised me, just how methodical and slow it can feel, and how hard it is to kind of build your own schedules for things that aren't yet under contract once you've felt what a contract is like. So like working on the follow-up book, that has been surprising. And then the other thing, I said this at the beginning, I don't know if everyone was on yet, but a really lovely surprise is just how many people from past chapters of my life have reached out again because of the book and have said such lovely things, have ordered the book. And it's really reconnected me with a lot of people. And that was such an unexpected surprise. And that's been really wonderful.
That's so cool. So this question is one of my favorite. Obviously, we all are going to buy your book, but what are some of your favorite authors or books?
Well, obviously you should buy Nina's books too. Yes. She is absolutely one of my favorites. But if you like the idea of reading fairy tales that have kind of a feminist bent, I really recommend Damsel by Alana K. Arnold. I quoted her earlier, but it's fantastic and brutal and lovely, and I really recommend it. It's very satisfying. I read Rosaria Munda's quote is on my cover. She blurbed my book, which was such an honor because I love her writing. I really recommend her books, Fireborn and Flamefall. It's like Roman legion, dragons, political intrigue, and just so smart and thoughtful. And then if you're interested in nonfiction, I recently read Why We Swim by Bonnie Tsui, and it was so powerful. Obviously, if you read this book, you know that I have strong attachments to the ocean. And it's just such a wonderful meditation on the community that we build around water and the history of swimming and how much it's a history of all of humanity. So I really recommend that too.
Awesome. So Thomas had a question. It's kind of two-part. How do you build characters as you write? And have you ever accidentally, or maybe intentionally, written a character like yourself into a book?
Oh, interesting. How do I build characters? As with everything, you know, some of it kind of comes more fully baked than other parts. Some parts take a bit more finessing. These characters, what came to me first was I just knew that I wanted them to have incredibly opposing goals that the audience could tell weren't actually the things that would make them happy. And so all of Natasha's character comes from wanting to be someone who will marry a king, and her belief in fairy tales and her desperation that fairy tales can be true. And conversely, Ella all spins out from believing her life is already a tragic story and not really caring about anything. She just wants that all of the tragedies she's experienced to mean something. And so figuring out the characters from there was really just figuring out, like, well, how did they get that way? And how do they still have enough vulnerability left that they could be there for each other? And have I ever written a character that's like myself? I think that I thought that I wrote characters that didn't sound like me, but a lot of my friends have read this book and said that particularly Ella just sounds exactly the way that I talk. So you be the judge. I think that it's impossible and maybe not even that useful to try to completely disentangle yourself from your characters. You know, you don't want to just throw yourself in a book and then make a boring book because you don't want to be hard on yourself or your characters, because then there's no conflict. But I also think that what can make a book really connect with people is being very specific and getting at those like personal truths. And to do that, I think you kind of have to accept that you're going to incorporate things that feel personal and vulnerable. And hopefully that means that it will feel personal and vulnerable to someone else too.
Excellent. So Jennifer had a question about your writing process. You touched on a little bit, but she's wondering, do you set aside time every day or write as you are inspired? She also says she's incredibly proud of you.
Hi. Thank you. I try to write every day. I do write every day. Sometimes I edit. That's actually my new strategy, is that I was always really good about just churning out a lot of words and writing. And now I'm focusing a lot more on thinking and planning and editing, because I know I can type fast, but I don't necessarily think that I can write well fast. But yeah, I try to write every day. I try not to just wait for the inspiration to hit me. One of the cool things about writing has been being a little bit scientific about inspiration and what it means when there is a lot of inspiration and what it means when there's not that much. And I think I've been getting a lot better at fabricating inspiration. You know, like, what do I need to do? What do I need to write about that makes me feel inspired? And if I don't feel inspired, and I feel writer's block or something that's stopping me, I try not to let myself off the hook there. I try not to just say, well, I guess that means I'm stuck. And instead say, what's stopping me? What point do I have to go back to if I want to reclaim that inspiration?
Excellent. So we have another question, and I may pronounce her name wrong, but Ariana asks, what's the biggest lesson you're taking into your next book?
Ooh, the biggest lesson I'm taking into my next book. I think one of the things that I really struggled with this book, and also struggled with the next book that's going to come out in 2022 that I've already written a couple drafts of and is with my editor right now, is figuring out what it means to be writing fantasy that is more about the characters than the plot or the world, maybe. I really agonized over setting reader expectations in this book because I know it's kind of an expectation in a convention of fantasy that when there's evil in the world, you overcome it. I see a lot of that in YA fantasy, and I think that that's super important because it reminds us that, you know, we can be heroic, we can be brave, we can overcome awful things. But I also think that there's something that feels really true about just seeking like happiness and joy and peace when we can't destroy every evil that's in our world, when we can't overcome everything all at once. And in both this book and the next one, I had a lot of endings that did not make it because I felt like the characters, I was just pushing them around and in places that they didn't want to go. And the characters were like, well, I guess we've destroyed evil and now we're going to invent American democracy. Yay, all is well. And that wasn't the book. That wasn't the story that I was trying to tell. That wasn't the point that I was trying to make. And so rewriting the ending of this book as many times as I did, I think maybe helped me not rewrite the ending of the next book as many times, but we'll see.
So we've got 2 or 3 questions that are basically the same, and then one more that I really want the answer to. But Nina asked if you would just give a few elements of your next book to us so that we can anticipate it.
Yes. I don't know what I'm allowed to say because I don't know what's going to change still. But if Girls at the Edge of the World is sort of both a love letter and a deconstruction of fairy tales, I would say the next book is, hopefully, those things of Greek mythology. Because when I wasn't reading fairy tales as a kid, I was reading Greek mythology. And I was so interested in the stories of, you know, Cassandra, cursed to tell the truth, but never to be believed. I was so interested in Athena and Artemis and Persephone and all of these goddesses who were so strong and yet in some ways so liminal to the gods walking around. And it also has a lot to do with oceans, with flooding, with animals, and whales. I read Moby Dick for a class around the time that I first got the idea for this book, and I hated it. And then I loved it, and then I hated it, and then I loved it again. And so I was really interested in incorporating just kind of the both beauty and brutality of whales, whale bodies, talking about how we treat animal bodies in a way that feels like a stand-in for female bodies sometimes. And yeah, whales, mythology, pirates. That's the next book.
Very cool. I have to say, I've also had to read Moby Dick several times. I hated it, but it is also one of the things I will never forget.
Yes.
Because there was anger when I was reading it, excuse me. So we have, let's see here. One last question and then a couple of comments, but Ariana is wondering, this book comes out during Pride Month, and was that an active decision?
That would be a question for my team probably, but we did know that it was going to happen during Pride Month, which was exciting. It wasn't like we originally signed the contract and we were like, yes, June 2021. Had to pause and remember what year it was, because it did take so long to finalize this book. But once we figured out the season, which was going to be this season, June 8th was the day that it fell. And I'm really excited that it has been in Pride Month because there's been so many like cool local bookstores and book bloggers who have been posting about just like a whole rainbow of books, which has been really fun.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So if if you can't see the chats, everyone just is giving you so much love and the chats. And I think this has been one of my favorite events of this year. So bravo, debut book, launch day in America. This has been so much fun. So I just want to remind everyone, there are several ways you can get the book. You can call us, purchase it over the phone, and then do the red bench pickup if you're still not comfortable coming in the store. We also are still doing owl delivery once a week, or obviously come in the store, grab a copy. You might take your picture for social media. And I do want to remind everyone that Nina's books are available. I know for sure that we have a copy of We Are Okay on the shelf, because we had to use it to confirm the spelling of your last name. So if you are interested in any of her other books, please give us a call. We'd be happy to order them for you. I want to thank you both for taking the time to support an independent bookstore. It's been a hard year for a lot of people, but Roundabout has stayed active in our community and with our readers. And it is because of authors like you and attendees and customers like what we have on tonight that has meant Roundabout stays in our community and keeps giving people books, and it just warms our hearts. So from all of us at Roundabout, thank you, Laura. Thank you, Nina. Thank you, everybody who's on here tonight.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Nina. And thank you, everyone, for coming. It means so much to see all of your names. I'm so, so grateful.
Well, until next time, everyone, thank you. Stay well and keep reading.